I thought my husband would never leave. Those were her words, not mine. But the way she said them, low and steady, caught in my head like a song I wasn't supposed to hear. I wasn't eavesdropping. Not really. I was at the counter, wiping grease off my hands, when she spoke into her phone in the waiting area. A repair shop isn't much for privacy. Every sound carries. Still, I knew enough to keep my head down, pretend like I wasn't listening. But her voice had a way of filling the room without trying. She was older than most of the customers who came in, mid-40s maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look like she didn't have time for anything frivolous. But there was something in her posture, shoulders too straight, jaw set, that gave her away. Like she was holding herself together out of habit, not ease. When she hung up, I looked up just a second too long. Our eyes met. That pause, longer than polite, shorter than comfortable, was the first thing I felt between us. She didn't smile, not exactly, but her mouth softened for half a beat before she looked away. I pretended to reach for a rag, though my hands were already clean. "Car giving you trouble?" I asked, because saying nothing felt worse. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Aren't they always?" It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like she had 10 heavier things on her mind, and the car was the one she could talk about without breaking. I walked her through the problem, explaining how the timing belt had worn down. She listened the way people don't anymore. Eyes steady, no scrolling on a phone, no fake nodding. Every time I looked up, she was already looking back, like she wanted me to keep talking. I noticed small things. The way her fingers brushed the counter, restless but careful not to leave prints on the paperwork. The way she tilted her head slightly when she asked a question, like she already knew the answer but wanted to hear it from me anyway. There was one moment I keep replaying. I reached for the pen to circle a part on the diagram, and she reached at the same time. Our hands almost touched. Not enough to be anything, but enough that I pulled back too fast. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her lips pressed together, and for the first time, her eyes flicked down, nervous or maybe curious. The silence after felt heavier than the machines in the shop. I tried to fill it. "Shouldn't take more than a day or two. We'll get it right." She nodded, but didn't move to leave. She stayed, standing there with that unreadable look, like there was more she could say but wouldn't. Finally, she gave a small, almost invisible smile and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she said simply, and walked toward the door. The sound of her heels faded, but the quiet she left behind stayed longer. I went back to wiping the counter, but my hand slowed until I wasn't really cleaning anymore. That pause, that glance, that almost touch, it shouldn't have mattered. And yet, for the rest of the day, I found myself replaying it. Like a line I hadn't meant to overhear, but couldn't forget. "I thought my husband would never leave. Now he's gone without goodbye." She said she wanted to check on the repair, though I'd already left a message on her voicemail. Maybe she hadn't heard it. Maybe she had. Either way, she was standing at the counter again, arms folded like she was holding herself in. I noticed her ring finger first. Bare. A faint line where something used to be. She tapped that finger on the counter without realizing. Each tap matched the beat of my own pulse. I kept my voice easy. "You're early. I was going to call when the part came in." Her mouth tugged upward, not quite a smile. "I thought I'd save you the trouble." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. She leaned against the counter, shoulders pulled back, like she wanted to seem relaxed but couldn't quite get there. There was a tiredness under her eyes, faint shadows that makeup didn't bother to cover. I caught myself staring too long and dropped my gaze to the paperwork. "You look like you've been working all day," I said before I could stop myself. Her laugh was small, sharp, but it softened as it left her. "Feels like I've been working all year." That was the first crack in her armor. Quick, barely visible, but it stayed with me. I asked about her car again, trying to give her a safe subject. She answered, but her tone drifted, like her mind was somewhere else. She'd trail off mid-sentence, then catch herself, straightening and pretending nothing had slipped. She reached for the pen to sign the estimate. Her hand trembled just enough for me to notice. She steadied it quickly, but I'd already seen. I didn't say anything. She must have felt me watching, though, because she cleared her throat and set the pen down harder than needed. "You must see people like me all the time," she said suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Like you, people waiting for something to get fixed. She said it too casually, but the words hung there. For a second, she wasn't talking about the car. I wanted to ask what she was really waiting on. Instead, I just nodded, pretending I understood more than I did. Her eyes lingered on me, steady, unreadable, before she looked away. She adjusted her sleeve, smoothed her hair, all those little movements people make when they don't want silence to give them away. Finally, she picked up her keys. Well, I should let you get back to it. I should have said something then. Anything. But the words jammed in my throat. She turned toward the door, then paused. Just for a heartbeat. She glanced back at me, her expression softer, almost uncertain, as if she'd forgotten what she meant to say. And then she left, the door shutting too loudly behind her. That pause, her almost turn, her half-swallowed words, followed me long after the shop went quiet. It was late by the time she came to pick up the car. The shop was already dark, the kind of quiet where every sound feels amplified. Rain tapped against the windows, steady but soft, like it had been waiting for this hour to fall. I stayed after closing, paperwork spread out on the counter, pretending I needed to finish it. Truth was, I knew she was coming. She stepped inside, shaking droplets from her coat, her hair damp at the ends. Something about seeing her out of daylight, her face softened in the glow of the desk lamp, made her seem different. Not smaller, not weaker, just less guarded. You didn't have to wait, she said, setting her keys down. I was here anyway, I lied. Her laugh was low, like she didn't believe me, but didn't want to push. She stood closer than usual, leaning slightly across the counter. The space between us felt smaller than it should have. I went over the final paperwork, sliding the page toward her. She picked up the pen, then paused halfway through signing. You ever notice, she said quietly, how some things break down just to keep you in place? Her eyes lifted to mine. There was no mistaking it this time. She wasn't talking about the car. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My chest tightened, like one wrong word could shift the ground under us. The silence stretched. She was still holding the pen, her fingers tense, her hand resting too long on the paper. I wanted to tell her I noticed everything. The way her laugh carried a trace of exhaustion, the faint mark where her ring used to be, the way she kept pretending she was only here for the car. Before I could, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression stiffening. For a moment, she didn't move, like she was hoping it would stop on its own. Then she answered, voice clipped. Yes, I'm fine. No, don't worry about it. Her eyes flicked toward me as she spoke, as if to make sure I hadn't heard too much. But I had. When she hung up, she pressed the phone flat against the counter, her knuckles pale. Sorry, she muttered, sliding the signed paper back to me. I should have looked away. Instead, I caught the faint tremor in her hand as she pulled it back. I reached for the pen, and for a second, our fingers brushed. Neither of us moved. The rain outside filled the silence. Her breath caught, just enough for me to hear. Then she stepped back, quickly, as though the counter had turned into something dangerous. She forced a smile, too quick, and reached for her coat. Thank you, she said, her voice softer than before. I nodded, but didn't speak. My throat felt tight. She left into the rain, the sound of the door closing sharp against the night. I stayed there with the pen in my hand, still warm from where her fingers had been, and wondered how close I'd just come to something neither of us were ready to name. She came back on a Thursday evening, just before closing. No repairs this time. She said she had questions about maintenance, but she didn't bring any papers, didn't ask anything that really needed answering. She just stayed. The shop was dim, half the lights off, shadows stretching across the concrete floor. I leaned against the counter. She stood opposite me, and for a while neither of us spoke. The air carried that thick weight silence gets when both people are waiting for the other to break it. Finally, she said, This, whatever this is, it doesn't make sense. Her voice wasn't sharp. If anything, it was tired, almost pleading. I swallowed. My first instinct was to deflect, to reach for another set of papers, to act like I hadn't heard. But her eyes pinned me, steady and unflinching. What doesn't? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. This, she repeated, motioning vaguely between us. Me, standing here at the end of your shift, talking about nothing. You pretending it's normal. I wanted to argue, to say I was just doing my job, but the words wouldn't come. We both knew that wasn't true. She took a slow breath, her hands clasped in front of her like she was afraid to let them move. I don't even know why I keep coming back. I stared at her, searching for something. Anger, humor, anything I could hold on to. But her face was stripped of all that. Just raw, unguarded confusion. You don't have to explain, I said carefully. Her laugh was bitter and short. That's the problem. I can't. We stood there, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. My chest ached with things I couldn't say. That she made the shop feel different. That I found myself watching the door even when I knew she wasn't coming. That I noticed her ring finger, bare but restless, every time she signed a form. Instead, I asked, "Do you want me to tell you to stop?" Her eyes met mine again, sharp this time, almost defensive, then softer. Would you mean it if you did? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The seconds dragged. Neither of us moved. Her shoulders rose with a shaky inhale, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked fragile. Not because she was weak, but because she was letting me see it. "What are we doing?" she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. I had no answer. Only the sound of her words looping in my head, unraveling every excuse I'd been holding on to. She finally broke the stare, turning toward the door. Her voice was steady again, but the steadiness sounded rehearsed. "I don't know how to be this person." Then she was gone, leaving the shop colder than before. And I was left standing in the silence, realizing I didn't know how to be mine either. It was quiet that afternoon, the kind of lull where the clock ticks louder than the tools. I didn't expect her to come by, but she did. No appointment, no reason. Just walked in with a folded envelope in her hand and a look I hadn't seen before. She didn't head to the counter this time. She sat on one of the plastic chairs by the wall, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to stay or go. I wiped my hands on a rag, trying to keep my voice steady. "Car trouble again?" She shook her head. "No, just trouble." The envelope rested on her lap, her fingers worrying the edges until it softened. After a long silence, she said, "I got a letter today. From him." I didn't need to ask who. Her ex, the husband who left without a goodbye. I leaned against the counter, careful not to move closer, careful not to push. "What did he say?" Her eyes stayed on the envelope. "That he's sorry. That he thought leaving would make things easier. For me. For him." A pause, then quieter. "He doesn't even know me anymore." The way she said it, flat, like she'd run out of anger but hadn't found forgiveness, made my chest tighten. She opened the envelope, slid out a photo tucked inside. She hesitated, then held it out. I crossed the space between us slowly, taking it with hands I tried not to let shake. It was her, younger, standing beside a man who looked more like a ghost than a memory. His arm draped around her shoulders. She wasn't smiling in the picture, not fully. Just a half curve of lips, eyes distant, like she already knew something wouldn't last. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly. I looked up, startled. "Me? Not the way he was at the end," she clarified, her gaze soft but unsteady. "The way he used to be, when he still believed in things." The words landed heavy, like she hadn't meant to say them out loud. Her hands curled together, tight enough to turn the knuckles pale. I didn't know what to do with that. I wanted to ask if that was good or bad, if being a shadow of her past meant I was already doomed. But instead, I just held the photo, staring at the version of her who seemed so far from the woman in front of me. She reached out, fingers brushing mine as she took the photo back. That small touch sent a jolt through me, sharper than it should have been. "I shouldn't have told you that," she whispered, almost to herself. But she had. And now the words lived between us, impossible to return. When she left, the chair stayed warm where she'd been sitting. I stood there long after, her voice still in my ears, wondering if I'd ever stop being compared to a man who had already walked away. She came after closing again. No car, no envelope, no excuse. Just her. The shop was half dark, tools already put away, the smell of oil lingering in the air. I thought about pretending to be busy, but something in her face stopped me. She wasn't guarded this time. just tired and softer than I'd ever seen her. "I shouldn't be here," she said, though she didn't turn to leave. I leaned back against the counter, wiping my hands on the rag I didn't need. "Then why are you?" She hesitated, then crossed the floor slowly, stopping just close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint rise and fall of her breath. "Because I don't know how else to be," she admitted. For a while, we said nothing. The hum of the refrigerator in the back filled the silence. My pulse felt louder than it should. "You remind me of who I used to be," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched mine like she was asking for something I couldn't name. I wanted to tell her I'd never met anyone like her, that she didn't need to be anyone else. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I stepped closer, slow enough to give her room to pull away. She didn't. The space between us disappeared until I could see the tremor in her hand as she adjusted her sleeve. Without thinking, I reached out and covered it with mine. Not tight, not claiming, just enough so she'd know I wasn't afraid to hold the weight she carried. She let out a breath, shaky and quiet, and her fingers turned into mine like they'd been waiting for it. We didn't kiss. We didn't say anything foolish or final. We just stood there, two people who didn't know what they were doing, but knew they couldn't pretend it wasn't happening anymore. Her forehead leaned against mine, light as a question, and I closed my eyes. The smell of rain still clung to her hair, the faint warmth of her skin pressing into the silence. After a long while, she whispered, "This can't last." I nodded, though I didn't move. "I know." But neither of us let go. The world outside went on. Traffic, rain, tomorrow waiting. But in that dim shop, with my hand wrapped around hers, it felt like we'd finally stopped running from the truth neither of us had meant to find. Quiet, earned, unavoidable. I still think about that night sometimes. The way the shop smelled of rain and metal, the way her hand trembled inside mine before it steadied. It wasn't a beginning, not really. And it wasn't an ending either. It was just something true. Something I didn't know I'd been waiting for. She didn't vanish after that, but she didn't stay either. We saw each other in passing. Her car needed less fixing, my shift stretched longer. The excuses that once pulled us into the same room thinned, until there weren't any left. But the quiet between us had already changed. I carry that change still. I notice things differently now. The way people laugh when they don't mean it. The way silence can weigh more than words. I pay attention to hands, how they hold, how they fidget, how they linger. Hers taught me that sometimes the smallest touch can feel louder than a declaration. She once told me, "You remind me of who I used to be." At the time, I thought it was a burden. Now I see it was a gift. She let me glimpse the version of her that still believed, and in turn, I found a version of myself I hadn't met yet. Did it become love? Maybe not in the way people write about it. Maybe not in the way that lasts forever. But it was real. And real has its own kind of permanence. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she ever rereads that letter from her husband. If she ever thinks of the shop, of the rain, of the silence that pressed us close. I wonder if her hand ever remembers mine. What I know for certain is this. Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. It doesn't always stay. But if you let it, even for a moment, it can change the way you move through the world. That's what she gave me. Not promises, not forever. Just the quiet truth that I was seen and that I saw her back. And somehow that was enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?